Look at these foreground pieces going by. That just like accelerates the action and the movement, you know. It's like a bamboo grove, you know, with many tall, thin things.
You know, here what it increasingly was doing was connecting repeated shots with a camera move instead of the traditional way it's done. Okay, see, every one of these is a separate shot, but they're tied together with a pan. That takes an editor who will tolerate you deciding which picture goes after which, to some extent. But also it's a sense of the chain of the movement and the rhythm of the movement. I would shoot probably 4 or 5 versions of every one of those little shots with different speeds, and he'd have to go find the set of 3 that felt like they were all notes in the same piece of music.
But I mean, look at that. There's just fluorescent tubes laying there at the base of the floor, lighting those walls. I mean, Jan just did a fabulous job. This could have been so nothing, the space, you know. Just, the lighting has a lot to do with it.
I've always, even though I'm probably musical illiterate, I've found myself thinking of movies as musical structures. A lot of people think that their books are print or somehow based on print, and they try to apply print logic to film, and personally I don't think it works. I kind of grew up around opera, and even though as I said, I'm musically illiterate, I think in musical forms at least.
I've tried very much. I mean, I've done a bit of writing about the process, but you know, it's not something that you can really reduce to a rational process. It's not rational. You know, it's everything that you are and that you've learned in your whole life responds to a piece of writing, and then this comes out. But, you know, it's like asking somebody, well, how do you write? You know, how do you breathe, you know? It mostly happens on an unconscious level, and most of the best stuff comes out after you've slept on it. Try not to react too soon. Look at that sweater he's wearing.
It is actually something that's always bothered me about films. It's the print preoccupation. You can listen to a piece of music and the print aspects of it is simply not important. And I think eventually people will get good enough with films that the film itself will be the end in and of itself. And they won't say, you know, does this represent some particular book-based set of ideas? Like that sequence that just went by there. It's the 4 shots leading up to the saw. They all seem to be of a piece, and they're all moving shots with 2 or 3 elements in them. So they're at least sort of musically in the same key, I guess is the way you think of it.
I love sets you can destroy like this. I'm a realist. I mean, things that are real are much more interesting than things that you think up. Spectacle movies that don't have strong ideas behind them are window dressing. They become decorative. And it's just like good architecture. It's based on necessity. That's what the modernists taught us. You know, that's what Mies van der Rohe in the Bauhaus was all about. And, you know, form follows not function, but story. And story, this is a realistic story. Even though it's an adventure, it's based on the real world. It's not doing things for effect. I mean, that's cheating. We had to figure this out. This has to make sense, or it's not scary. It's just a movie. I mean, the way this looks, that's the way it would look if the lights were there. The Red Castle is, McTiernan really likes naval history, and he gave me the job of figuring out, you know, what the code word was. So Takagi had served in World War II, or his family had, or the head of the company served in the Japanese Navy in World War II on the Akagi, which was an aircraft carrier. It means Red Castle.
I don't know, eventually it may be possible to make movies where every image has nuance, the way music has nuance, and every image in a dream has nuance. You don't necessarily know the meaning of a picture, but you feel it. You feel it has meaning. It's connected to something somehow. It expresses a feeling in your dream. Eventually there'll be a visual Beethoven who can make every image have the intensity and the nuance of a dream. And you won't think about the text, the words that are represented by the pictures. You'll just simply have the visual experience. One doesn't ask a musical experience to prove itself or translate itself. And I think music can simply be dramatic on its own. You know, that theoretical Beethoven may get to the point where he'll get his audience to stop asking the pictures to be translated into words.
All this had to be worked out, you know, how this would actually happen, if you could really do this. And, you know, you can really do this. All the stuff that happens with the elevators. So the thing you have to do is you have to have strong ideas, and you have to pursue them ferociously, wherever they may lead, as long as you've got time, money, and stamina. Everybody's stamina. Remember, there were people that couldn't stand up that were building these things and painting these things because they, you know, you work 7 days a week, a 12-hour shift, 10 or 12-hour shift. You know, after 2 or 3 weeks, you're just like semi-conscious. Just go as far as you can, and then you get to amazing places. And that's what this movie had, and everybody involved did that.
And you notice that every one of those shots started with a dolly and leading into that elevator shot. But more than that, it also starts with a dolly move that's sympathetic with the dolly moves that preceded it. Part of the censored camera movement that I was working on here, I do it less self-consciously now, but I still try to do the same thing, is your own eyes move around constantly. And there's just things about a picture that lead you to the next picture, and your eyes move there. And if you set it up right with a camera, you don't have to cut. The audience's eyes want to go with you to wherever the camera move is going.
Something, Hans. Yes, we do. We have to tell Carl his brother is dead.
The whole thing about the geography of the building and what floor he's on and what floor they're on and back and forth and stuff was rigorously worked out. It wasn't considered important in the beginning, but it became, you know, art department people are obsessive about stuff like that. You know, where is he? You know, what is the number? What number is he going to run by? How is that going to tell you, you know, what information are you going to get? It's a real elevator shaft. And Willis did ride the top of the elevator. Scared the shit out of me. That's him, that's in a real elevator, he's really doing that. I think we may have done the top. Now this is a set. Well, you could never actually do that in a real elevator, get him so close to it.
I've been asked how planned that approach is. I can't, I guess when I started it was elaborately planned. Now I sort of, it's as if I have a melody in my head and I hum the melody. Although it's a visual humming. And when I first started to make films, I drew diagrams of the length of every cut and all sorts of nonsense, sort of Germanic theories. And eventually I realized that most of them weren't very useful, in that rather than make a cut where the theory said you'd do a lot better if you just made the cut where it felt like you should cut. And the hard part was learning to trust where that feeling was. And Frank Curiosity was particularly helpful for that, because it turned out his father had been a composer in the movie business and a music cutter. And he personally just thought of cutting as music because he came from a music background.
I thought that at this point in their careers that McTiernan and Silver were a perfect match for each other. Because it was McTiernan's honesty and intelligence and Silver's showmanship at this point. You know, they gave each other more of those qualities than they normally have. Silver was very much into a big picture mode and glamour and old Hollywood kind of thing. And I don't care if it makes sense, and McTiernan cares if it makes sense, and he doesn't care how glamorous it is. You know, he's like, make it march. So between the two of them, you know, you got both.
Now, part of not cutting in trying to just connect things was about giving the audience the sense that it was real, like sort of like when you get him up on top of the building there. You actually go 180 degrees or something and say, oh, we're actually up on top of this building. I can't claim to be the first one who ever thought of that.
Kind of a nothing set that really works.
What do I think about multiple cameras? I don't use them, actually. Well, using multiple cameras is just if you, boy, it's going to sound so arrogant, but if you don't know where you're going to cut and you're hoping that one of them gets there accidentally, you get a lot of cameras. An old cameraman, he wasn't that old, but Don McAlpine, the Australian guy, when I did Predator, I asked him if we should be using more cameras in this, and he said to me, well, which one are you going to look at? Meaning you can't really do your job on more than one camera at a time, so you use multiple cameras on a stunt, on things where it's very hard to physically reproduce it. Just for economic reasons, you've got 5 or 6 cameras out there if necessary. Actually, I shot the helicopter sequence in this all in one 2-hour period on a Sunday night. It was an enormous bureaucratic and governmental thing to get the helicopters into those buildings. And it's the only way I could get all the coverage is I got 6 camera crews and I gave them all an instruction of what shots they were supposed to get. And we ran the helicopters through 4 times, I think. And each time the camera crew would, once he got his first assigned shot, he'd move on to his next assigned shot. For that I used multiple cameras, but just about nowhere else did we ever do it. And I still don't.
Reginald VelJohnson, he's had an amazing career after this. Like his own TV series and everything. Must be a gazillionaire. He's sure wonderful.
Dispatch to 8 Lincoln 30, over.
This is 8 Lincoln 30, come on in, over.
Investigate a code 2 at Nakatomi Plaza, Century City.
8 Lincoln 30 to dispatch. I'm on my way.
In the meantime, up on the roof,
one of the nice things that Jan de Bont brought was tolerance of what appear to be photographic flaws. Like the flares all over the place and things. And actually, he was sticking flares and lights here and there constantly, and we made it a style to put as many photographic flaws and things as possible. This film is anamorphic. I had tried to shoot Predator in anamorphic, and they hadn't been able to convince somebody in the studio bureaucracy because it cost more money. At the time, it was people didn't shoot with it unless they had some specific reason, and my personal sense was that it was cheap as possible special effect because it looks like a big movie when just the simple distortion that comes from anamorphic.
This is a real ventilation shaft. It's an amazing thing. They go all the way down the building, those shafts. Okay, back to the set.
We just started using stuff that Bruce happened to look at the girl who went by in the airport scene or something, and we kept using it, and then I used it here as geography.
That's the reason he touched it, so you know where he was. He's at the top of the elevator shafts now. Set. Point of view of real elevator shaft. It's beautifully worked out. This action. Set.
Jack Degovia is the designer on this film. Jack's the best designer I've ever worked with. And I would work with him continually, except he's also probably the most expensive designer I've ever worked with. He's a delight. He's filled with ideas, and he's somebody that you can actually talk the drama with, talk the story with, as opposed to, golly, wouldn't it be nice to have this kind of furniture here in this scene?
back down.
It's one of my favorite things. Okay, this is a set. How is he going to get across the shaft into the ductwork? How are we going to shoot this? Okay, that's a painted backing.
Rather than special effecting in a photographically putting in, that's just a painting covering the mattress. This sequence actually took a long time. We had the stunt people shooting it, climbing down into the duct. I don't know, the second or third time they attempted to shoot the thing, the stuntman fell. We thought, oh, it didn't work again, we're going to have to start over.
He actually drops toward it. This made the editor stand up straight in dailies. The stuntman fell into an airbag underneath the backing, and he just fell.
And Frank Uriosity said, wait a minute, isn't there some way we could use this? I said, suppose we let the guy fall. I gotta say, he came up with the essence in of this sequence, because it wasn't scripted that way, and we hadn't planned on having him fall and save himself. Now, that was an accident right there. We thought we'd blown the shot and had to start over.
That's what made the editor stand up straight. He thought somebody had really fallen, because of course in the uncut shot, he just keeps going down. He thought he was dead.
This little moment, this line, Steve D'Souza phoned in. We kept looking for ways to get places for Bruce to be Bruce. The TV dinner line was the one that D'Souza phoned in. We shot maybe 8 different lines.
There's some continuity errors that were not the fault of the wardrobe. It's because things were shot out of continuity, and so his undershirt gets more or less clean and dirty, kind of out of order a little bit.
We shortened a shot coming up, and people always thought that Bruce's T-shirt changed color on him.
You know, that's going to happen, so you make sure that nothing happens because you caused it. There's enough unavoidable stuff that has to be accepted, so you don't want it sneaking in just because you're sloppy. And everybody who worked in this picture was far from sloppy.
It's funny that we were talking about language and stuff, and I keep trying to get language out of movies. So the movie I'm working on right now, the whole movie's in a foreign language except specific lines that are important, but the rest of the time I've contrived it so it's perfectly plausible that any line that doesn't matter for the story is said in some other language. And there's no subtitles, there's no nothing, it just goes by. My notion is that a lot of times what's expressive in words is the sound of the words rather than the specific meaning of them. This is ridiculous. You don't want to know anything about all this, but there's this shrink who has done all this work with autistic children, and it's a guy who's given up shrinkdom and is he's a marketing maven for a lot of large corporations, and he makes millions of dollars a year telling corporations what people really mean by particular phrases or what they actually think about something. And has done all this work with autistic children, and has found that the reason they don't speak isn't that they don't have the mechanism to speak, it's because their emotional equipment is fucked up, and consequently they have no reason to speak, because speech is, first of all, not a code of meaning, not a way to communicate to others. It is purely a way to translate emotion into noise. And if you have no reason to express emotion as noise, you won't speak. And that's what it is first. I grew up watching foreign movies, studying foreign movies, and I never bothered to read the subtitles. Often, if I saw the movie a second time and did read the subtitles, or certainly if I heard a dubbed film, the movie would fall flat. It was far better when the words were just an expression, were like movie score.
Eddie?
I had a feeling you'd be calling.
Just the mechanics in this movie, since we were shooting all over the place, was keeping the tie-togethers officially, I suppose you could call continuity, but it wasn't really continuity. It's making it so that the shots would physically tie together or emotionally tie together as if they were in a particular orientation to one another.
Nur ein Mann.
Alex hat einen nervösen Zeigefinger.
We had that false alarm, you know. They asked me that goddamn computer sent you out on another wild goose chase. They've been chasing bugs in this system ever since they installed it.
Notre Dame on top of USC.
Oh, shit. Come on, I got $50 bet on them assholes.
Come on, where's the fucking cavalry?
Wo ist er? Marco, er stand 34. Geh, schnell, 34. Mach schon.
This is the teen horror movie moment. Let's split up. Go down and take care of him. Nice touch. He's wearing the cowboy boots.
Nah, help yourself.
Seconds left in this first period. 7-0 Notre Dame. The Irish driving 74 yards in 8 plays with...
This fucking...
Free, motherfucker, drop it! Put that fucking gun down! Put the gun down! Okay, put it down! Don't shoot! Drop that fucking gun down!
Anybody else would have wrecked focus.
Oh, the hell with this.
You are done! No more tape!
Yes, he's going to get it right through the Nakatomi.
Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate.
Thanks for the advice.
Sorry to waste your time. No problem at all. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful. Dum-da-dum, delightful.
For the love...
8 Lincoln 30 to dispatch.
8030, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a wild goose chase over here at Nakatomi Plaza. Everything here is okay. Over. But nobody has no place to go. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
Damn, God, everything is a
This is that. Shut up, Bruce, through the broken window. Argyle's like completely...
I guess it's part of trying to keep a sense of humor in the film so that when ultimately it does get heavy, you haven't exhausted the audience with how portentous it all is beforehand.
Good stunt here. It's so real, you know? Totally believable. I like the fact the flowers ended up inside the car. This was one of the first really disruptive location movies, you know, that we really just, you can imagine with all those very expensive condos across the street and setting off guns and bombs and blowing out windows in the middle of the night. Flying helicopters under 500 feet up Avenue of the Stars. We're the movie. This was a real studio, I think.
All right, now we're getting to the outside sequences. We actually shot at this building that is now usually called the Nakatomi Tower, which belonged to Fox at the time. They thought it was a great idea to shoot their movie in it, and then they realized that they had all these people, all these law firms.
I don't think it would be possible today to do what we did. People are more powerful. I mean, they've enfranchised themselves to take control of their lives because, they've organized, they've complained. Otherwise, the entire city would become a backlot. They'd be shooting 24 hours a day. And there are some poor streets in Hollywood, like Bronson Canyon, that have rows of wonderful period bungalows where they're during TV season and movie trucks there every week. There have to be rules.
There's an unmotivated move. which if I didn't have Frank Uriasti, I would never have wound up in the movie. I could have shot it, but I'd never get it past. I'd have a giant fight with the editor who would go up behind my back and say, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. But European filmmakers had been making moves that were motivated on emotion rather than on the physical movement of the character. They'd been doing it for 30 years. It just hadn't been done in mainline American movies. And I think probably Paul Verhoeven was the first of the directors working, at least when I had come to awareness, who had the nerve to do that sort of stuff. And he created a lot of freedom for a lot of the rest of us to pursue things. And now it's gotten a bit silly. You've got rock videos, they're spinning in circles and going up and down or often for no reason at all.
Mr. August.
Now we're into the shoji screens without rice paper. Always like those. They divide space. It's like a fence rather than a wall.
The old conservative establishment in the States, when I started working, had a notion called zero-point cinema, which is the completely neutral cinema that has no expression of the author. And it had all sorts of rules which are not unlike the dogma movement in Europe now.
Mr. Cowboy.
Well, these doors are out of Japanese military architecture.
It was odd, in the beginning of Red October, I had actually replaced an Academy Award-winning editor because he literally didn't know how to deal with the stuff I was shooting, with the physical movements. He didn't know how to make the cuts. He's a very fine editor. And he was a lovely man, and I liked him a lot. But I was sort of devastated because I had to... Actually, I kept him in the movie after as an actor.
It's a little newsroom set. I always like these little graphics. This carpet. Good thing to use on video. Very simple.
Good evening. This is Harvey Johnson.
Michael Kamen. He's a wonderful sense of play in his score. A slightly ironic, facetious sense that the movie has. We were trying to get throughout. He picked up on when he just saw the movie silent. And, so he has all of the little repeats of the Christmas carols and various things woven through it. And he helps with the thing we've been talking about how do you deal with a comedy in something like this so that it doesn't impinge on the story. Very often, the music will let the audience know it's okay to think this is ridiculous, because the storytellers think this is ridiculous.
We have some problems. How's your schedule?
We deliberately gave his rig a kind of, I always like the way that special effects rigs look, because they're all machined and made on lathes by hand and unique products. And this whole deal with the drill and the set, I told Al, so just make it the way you would make it if you were doing it. And that's how it turns out, because it's beautifully machined, but you don't polish anything or finish anything. It just is.
Can you identify yourself?
Not now. Maybe later. Listen.
I like this set, the computer floor.
All right, here's the deal.
Basic idea was, at that time, they built false floors for computers out of tile so they could run all the big cables and stuff, because computer terminals then were like ice boxes. And we just took that floor and ran it up over the walls and the ceilings and made this whole crosshatch thing. So when he started shooting it, McTiernan took that and did a cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Now there's he referenced that, and you'll see that. He all of a sudden goes into Dutch angles, and all the stuff. So you see these lines like running across at angle. It's really good.
Watch how every time there's a cut, it looks like they're in a relation to one another in one way or another. These two scenes are shot close to 4 months apart. At the time, I was, more formal than I am now, and I literally graphed it out so that when one moved, the other would move. And when one changed sides of the camera, the other changed sides of the camera.
LA's finest are on it. So light him if you got him.
Way ahead of you, partner.
So what do I call you?
Some film stocks really shout blue. There's a lot of blue in this picture, but I don't paint it in. It's always there. It's tricky.
If you
It's a lighting issue and it's a film stock issue. I mean, it's very strong in some stocks. I don't really have a color palette that I'm aware of. I mean, I do probably, but I'm not aware of it. I try not to be aware of it, let me put it that way. And I'll make choices, based on what we're forced into by the locations. First of all, that's where you have to start, what you know you're going to have there. First of all, we had to go with the building. Second of all, it was Wrightian. And third of all, there was all the stone and gray and stuff. And we were in the mechanical spaces, which are all grays and that rust red primer color, the color of machinery, of steel. So when you try and put it all together, you got to put it together with what is. And then you amplify that and you make it strong. And I mean, a lot of the colors in the interior are in the exterior of the building. That's why it's all of a piece. All those red browns, stainless steel, black and white.
In fact, I think he's a cop.
I think it's death for a production designer to start thinking about his own style. If you're going to be referential, self-referential is the worst referential you can be, You can't be aware. It's just like an actor, being aware of his performance. Never works. I hated that damn antenna that was up and just flopped around. It looks like, a weenie. And he ended up driving over every shard of junk. But the world has a style if you're looking at parts of it. And it's really a matter of, like making sure that those industrial things get into the decorated things so that it makes a piece. Look at her top, It's in the palette, It's a major color, that rust red.
I think the shoot was about, 80 days midway, one way or the other, 85, 86 days. We weren't particularly late, and I think by the time we got, on the home stretch, the studio had seen enough of the movie that they were quite happy, and they mostly wanted us to get it done so we could get it finished and get it out.
Unless you like it messy, I'd start bringing us in groups to the
I don't like a movie to be scheduled, even if you think it's going to take more than 80 days. I hate to have them scheduled for longer than that because everybody just slows down and the energy goes out of it.
No, thank you.
I don't think a movie should be scheduled for more than 80 days. It shouldn't take more than 80 days to shoot. I think there are some things that have enough special effects in them that I can understand why they take longer, but taking longer to shoot than that is a decision that will determine the style of the movie, actually. And it's not an improvement. It doesn't get better because you spent more time shooting it. A certain amount of simple kinetic energy is often, more intuitive and effective than if you slow down and stop and think about it all. It doesn't necessarily get better. The last time I let a movie get over 85 days was Last Action Hero, and since then I've insisted that we run about 75 days for a movie.
Argyle, didn't you ever have to take a pee? Oh, you're doing all that drinking and partying in there. Fortunately, they were building next door. It gave us this wonderful construction site. McTiernan's got a great eye for faces, something he does really, really well. All these characters are unmistakable, so you're never in any doubt, except with the terrorists. Aside from Goodenough, they're interchangeable. They're all kind of like German-looking, but that's right. And everybody who has got a part of advancing the action, you always know who they are.
In terms of dealing with inserts and small bits and pieces shots, I will often run a kind of internal second unit where we'll leave some guys behind or have them go ahead of us and handle the long setup shots, like that stunt shot where the guy was going down the shaft and fell. That's the setup that took 4 men 2 days and sitting there. So I use a second unit for that sort of thing. Most of the rest of it I shoot myself, unless it's a physical thing where somebody else can just do it just as well or better than I. In the Thomas Crown affair, I had somebody else shoot the aerial stuff because it's silly to have me flying around in a helicopter when somebody else could. And I'd set the style, and I'd looked at the material. Well, for the first couple of days I looked at every shot, but then I just got out of the way and let them work. In this film, I think I shot just about all of it, including silly things like this thing coming up here, the terrorists coming down with the hundreds and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and then being a little uncertain about whether or not he should steal a bar of candy.